Hi, Eddie.
Hey, Kasey.
Change my background.
How are you doing, Kasey?
Wait, just a second. My AirPods aren't connected.
Oh no.
2 seconds. Come on. Okay, cool. I think they're hooked up now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. How are you doing, Kasey?
I'm doing good. How are you?
You say that with the biggest grin on your face. I'm doing okay, actually.
Did you work earlier today already?
Yes, I did. All the way from 9.
Damn, I can't imagine. You work so many hours.
I enjoy it at least. So
That's good. That's good. That's the most important part.
yeah.
Okay.
So are you ready for the React side of things?
I think so. Like I was like, oh, should I like run through it to prepare? But I'm like, no, it's okay. I just like I know it. Like just gotta go with the flow. But yeah. Okay. Should we just have them like if they haven't installed Node yet, just give them instructions in the beginning to get that running while you like do your short like little presentation thing?
Yeah, actually that's probably a good idea, yeah. Yeah, because I think my presentation is probably gonna be like 15-20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
So for those who don't have it, they can do it during then.
Okay, cool. And then yeah.
Hopefully it goes smooth.
I hope so too. I think it'll be fine. So, hopefully people don't run into issues with the Node stuff, but
yeah, I feel like that's probably the main thing.
yeah, I know there's something like I had Node.js version 11 on my computer for a while, so I had to like update in order to use the Create React app. I think to at least like 12 or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think mine was like 10 and I had to update mine. So yeah, that was quite the process. But hopefully if people have it a fresh install, that's probably the easiest solution. But if they have an old version, that's gonna cause some problems.
Yeah, I know. I don't have to reconfigure my thing because it always defaults to version 11, so I have to manually like change it every time. Like, damn it, like
you gotta change the settings.
I know. Figure that out sometime. I just hate the setup and installation stuff. Like I'm so lazy. Like,
oh yeah, definitely.
Like, if it works right now, I think it's all good. But yeah, I'll just make sure to warn them because it's pretty stupid. The React app thing only tells you you can't install it after it finishes installing pretty much most of it. And then it's like, oh, your Node version isn't good enough. So you have to redo the whole thing. So
right. Yeah, I've actually done that, so I know exactly what you mean.
Like,
yeah.
Hey, Nick. Hi, Nick.
Hey.
All right, so I made you guys co-host on the off chance that I disconnect or something.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right, so yeah. I think, yeah, we're probably going to tell everyone to install Node if they haven't already, because I'm going to do a short introduction so that they can hopefully install it in that process, and then we'll get started with our React stuff.
Woo.
All right, I think I could probably start letting everyone in.
Yeah. I may end up popping into my Zoom and checking my email in case the reverse of last time happens where people enter my Zoom even though it's yours this time. So
right. No, that makes sense.
But right now it looks like no one in my Zoom.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
How's everyone doing on this Saturday afternoon?
Good.
A lot of goods.
I have my dog in Berkeley for the day.
Oh, yeah. Cute.
Yeah, she just got groomed recently. Vanilla. My mom drove up like last night. Yeah.
All right, I think we're probably just waiting on a few more people. Do you remember how many people in total was there?
I think there were 14 of us yesterday,
Okay.
but I can't remember.
Missing just a handful. And yeah, for those who didn't come to yesterday's, all that we did in the yesterday pre-workshop was mostly just go over HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you're familiar with that, great. If not, you can watch the workshop later for another time. And then also,
We're missing Tristan and Emmett.
okay. All right. So for those who may not have seen it, it would definitely be helpful if you have Node installed on your computer. I think in the Discord there's a link to actually download Node. So if you haven't already, now is probably the best time to do it. So hopefully that installation process goes well. And yeah, I think also if you have an older version of Node, you might need to update it to, was it 11 or 12? So be wary of that.
Above 11 for
Above
sure.
11.
I think it's 12. But
Yeah, that's what I think too, but we'll see. So yeah. Oh, that's definitely
yeah,
fine.
that should be fine.
That's perfect. Oh yeah, there's a link. Yeah, that's perfect. See Alice shaking her head.
My sister just came in and told me that she wanted to take a nap, so I had to turn my volume down, and I told her I wouldn't, so she's mad at me now.
All right, well, I guess we could probably get started. I think Nick, if you want, you could probably like ping Tristan and Emmett in the Fullstack just to let them know that we're just about to start. But yeah, all right, let's get started. All right. So can everyone see my screen? Perfect. All right. So I'm going to just do a short introduction to full stack development, kind of just like introduce the concepts of what we're actually going to be building, what we're going to be creating, and just the idea behind it all, right? Then eventually we're going to move into actually working on creating our front end part of our application, all right? All right, so let's get started then. So full stack development. So what is full stack development? Well, I think this is probably a good simplified version of what it is. Basically, it's the development of creating both the client side and the server side portions of a web application or website, right? So we're dealing with two ends of our web application. The client side usually referred to as the front end, and the server side is usually referred to as the back end, right? So the front end is typically the visible parts of your website or app, all the stuff that the user interacts with. And the back end is all the stuff that's happening under the hood, getting all the database information, collecting all the different things, and making sure that it's sending the correct information. So here's kind of like a simplified graphic of what that looks like. So we start off by having the user. So the user needs to have some sort of way to interact with the front end. That's where your browser comes into play, or whatever device you're kind of using. They interact with the front end. They typically make a request to either a website or some location. And that request then gets sent to some type of web server. And now based off of this web server, there will most likely have some like app logic behind it, or kind of figures out what it needs to get in order to send a response back to the front end and have the user visually see everything that it needs to. All right. So now let's kind of go a more in-depth look at how this all works. All right. So the same idea as what I mentioned before, we start off with the client side. The client needs to make a request. This request is typically done when you type in the URL, right? The HTTPS and the URL, right? This will most likely get sent to an HTTP server. Now, based off of that information, if it's a very simple request or simple thing that it can actually do, it sends that information right back right away. But if it's a more complicated request, like accessing an app server that we're probably going to create, then it needs to go to our server. Once it gets to our server, it then needs to interpret that request and process that information. Once it gets that information, it then needs to check, oh, am I doing anything with the data that I have stored in my database? If so, I need to actually connect to my database. And once it gets to the database will interpret that request to either update, get the information, or delete whatever we need to in our database. Once it finishes that, it's going to send a response back to our app server. Then the app server is then going to process that information, make sure it compiles and kind of forms the correct information that we need to send back to our client, in which case goes back to our HTTP server, which then eventually goes back to our client. All right, so that's the more complicated story of how that works. So for those who are familiar with how I teach websites in general, I like my analogies. So I'm going to kind of explain this in a simple analogy. Let's think of this as a sit-in restaurant. A customer is a user, all right? So they have to kind of sit at a table. When they sit at the table, that's what they visually see. That's what they're getting. That's what the front end is going to be. Now, we'll have a server who comes to you and asks you, what do you want to eat? You look through a menu probably and say, oh, I want a Google sandwich of some sort, right? Then that server is going to take that request, take it back to the kitchen, which is the back end, in which case they will interpret what the request is, prepare whatever they need to that's necessary, and give it back to the server, which will then give it to the customer. All right, so hopefully that makes this a lot simpler to understand. All right, so this full stack development can just be simplified as a restaurant. Awesome. So let's break down each part individually. First, let's talk about the front end. Again, front end is the visual part of our website, the way that the user directly interacts with it and how it basically what we see. All right. So here's kind of a more in-depth look at our front end, right? It's kind of the same ideas as what we've been talking about earlier. But one thing I wanted to mention is that the front end will have specific client side scripts and processes. And the front end is specifically only tied to itself. The only way that it interacts with our backend is through requests. All the displaying information, all the kind of processing information is happen on the client side. All right, so what you visually see will happen, and that's the front end essentially. All right, and what you actually see on the front end is typically mostly just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? Things we've talked about yesterday. So to kind of quickly go over those concepts, HTML, basic structure of an HTML element, pretty simple. CSS, actually applying the styles to it. Again, also fairly simple that we can implement. And then last but not least, JavaScript. There's a lot of JavaScript involved on the client side. When we get into that, we start talking about frameworks. So now frameworks are something that has become quite popular recently, within like the quite couple of years or so. But yes, so frameworks, the idea behind frameworks is to kind of make the developer's job a lot easier to create websites. They make it easy to kind of specify how to create the certain processes and visuals we need to display what we need to have, right? Rather than having to completely create code from scratch, we can just use one of these or multiple of these frameworks to actually build an application, right? Here are some of the like more popular ones. They don't necessarily have to be in a specific language. I know, I think most of these that I have here are JavaScript based. There's other ones as well that are like Python, Ruby, and I believe C based as well. But yeah, there's multiple frameworks that we can use. The framework we're going to be using is React, all right? So that's basically it about the front end. So now let's talk about the back end, all right? So again, the back end's purpose is to kind of structure the data that we have in a very nice and efficient way. It needs to also be able to handle requests and responses, being able to understand what is being asked from them, as well as being able to send the proper information. And another thing about backend is we want to make sure that it's secure. If we have a database, we want to make sure that that information and that data is safe and secure, so no one can hack us or anything. All right, so here's the more complicated side of how a backend would work, right? We get a request from a user that would typically go to some type of API that we have available. Now that is going to be us creating our different routes, which we'll get to later on. These API routes will then go to our frameworks that we have on our backend. So again, talking more about frameworks. But in this case, these are going to be our back-end frameworks. So hopefully it won't be confusing because we have front-end frameworks and back-end frameworks. All right. So the back-end frameworks are mostly going to be dealing with making sure that everything is structured in a way that we can interpret the data that we're getting and sending the correct information out as well. All right. And if we need a database connected, we can have databases as well. Being able to connect to the database, get the information, and return what's needed. All right. So again, some more back-end frameworks that we can use. The one we're going to be using is Express. Again, that's going to be a JavaScript-based framework. Other ones that might be popular are if you're Flask and Django for Python, Rails for Ruby, and other ones that are probably not listed here that I couldn't find a better picture for. But yeah, and then the last thing I wanted to touch up on is databases. All right, so I mentioned databases before, but for those who don't know what a database is basically it's a collection of interrelated data which helps in efficiently retrieving, inserting, deleting data from some kind of location. Basically a giant storage for us. And this information can be very helpful depending on what we want to save, whether it's a user information or tweet information, right? Depending on our database and what website or application we're building, we might need to save data. And that's where a database will come into play. All right, so here I'll mention just a few of the like different types of databases and quickly go over them. One in particular is Oracle. Oracle is kind of like its own kind of separate style of database. I believe it uses like a unit database as opposed to some of the other ones that I'm more familiar with and probably in all of that. Other ones I want to mention are SQL databases. They're a structured query language, which SQL stands for. Basically, they are used to retrieve data in a relational format, meaning those types of databases, you would have to create tables that can have relations with other tables that can be connected with each other. So that way we can have different pieces of data that are kind of interconnected. And there's a lot of SQL similar languages like MySQL or PostgreSQL. And we're actually going to be using PostgreSQL. And we'll explain why when we get to our backend stuff. And then the last but not least is the type of database I want to talk about is NoSQL. Basically, it's a database that does not use relational, that is not relational based. The more popular one for that one would be MongoDB, right? So that one is more of like a document like database where it accesses a document as opposed to tables, all right? So to kind of go off of that, here's kind of like a more example of like the differences between a relational database and a non-relational database. Here we kind of have like the different tables for a relational database, whereas in our non-relational, it's more just like one document. And we can access the data in various ways. All right, so now that's it. Now is probably the best time to kind of go over what we're actually going to be building. All right, so I actually have a sample of our website that we're going to make. We're going to be making a very simple to-do list application. Very simple because we want something that we can easily kind of build upon if you're interested on kind of like adding to this or just making something else that you want to do. This is kind of to guide you like the base foundations of how to create something. All right, so here I have some to-dos. I can easily just add some more to-dos. Let's see, finish workshop, right? That's something I need to add on my to-dos list, right? So that gets added on immediately. And if you notice, it says I have 6 total tasks. Well, I can also show the tasks I have already finished, in which case I can check them on and off to say that I have done them and haven't done them, all right? And all of this is actually interconnected with our database. So here, if I open up my database, here I made a SQL query to actually view what's inside my database. And since I added a new thing, I can easily just see that it has been added to my database. Now here I can just check things off. And there we go. And I can also delete things as well. And that takes them off of my database as well. Yeah, so this is a very simple application that we're going to build. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Kasey, who's going to go through how to create this React front-end application.
Okay, cool. So I hope by now everyone should have their version of Node.js installed. Check your version, like I think Jimmy sent in the chat how to do it, node-v. Should be, I think 12 should be fine, but 11 definitely won't work with the React app anymore. So make sure you've got those 2 things. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and share my desktop really quick. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and if you have Node installed, you should be able to install the React app, I believe. So go ahead and navigate to whatever folder you want to put it in. And then all you have to do is npx create React app, and then followed by with whatever you want your app to be called. So I don't know, let's see, Fullstack front end. And then if I just hit enter, oh wait, shoot, I forgot to change my Node version. Second. Okay, and then if you run it now, oh shoot, let me rename my thing. Stack. Okay. So it's going to take a little bit of time to download everything because React has a lot of dependencies. So go ahead and just wait for that to happen. Oh, where do you recommend you save it? Honestly, I just save everything on my user folder, which probably is not a good idea. Feel free to save it wherever though. Yeah, it doesn't really matter where it is as long as you can find it later. Okay. Okay, and if it successfully installs, it should look like this in the end. If anyone's having trouble with that, just let us know, either like unmute or like say something in the chat. We just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So it's here, I'll go ahead and send in the chat too. MPX, oh my gosh, autocorrect, stop. Okay, I'm just gonna type in my terminal because the chat keeps auto-correcting. So MPX create React app, and then whatever you want your name of your app to be. So my app, like you can name that whatever. So yeah, let me know if you guys have any other questions. Oh, thank you, Eddie. Okay, is anyone, I'm not sure where you guys are, but is anyone still waiting for their stuff to install? Or are we good? Okay, still waiting, cool. We'll wait a little bit. I guess while we're waiting, I could just talk a little bit about React. So like Eddie said, it's a framework that's pretty popular these days. And it's used to make single page web applications. Because I'm pretty sure a lot of you have used like multiple HTML files while you're teaching kids, like, and having to create like whole new templates for each one. But the nice thing about React is it's technically a single page. And then what you can do is you can render different components. So different sets of kind of like HTML onto the screen interchangeably. So personally, I wasn't a huge fan of web dev before just because HTML is kind of tedious and like CSS, but like learning about React, I'm like, okay, this is something cool. Okay, name, contain, oh, I did not know it can't contain capital letters. That is my bad. My app. But yeah, I'll wait like a minute or two more.
I got a couple warnings saying that I have a high severity vulnerability. Is that something to be concerned about, or is that
I
just
got
something
that
we'll say in the
too,
beginning?
honestly.
Okay.
I think it's fine. It should still run. Since we're just doing this for like learning purposes, I think it's all good.
Casey's trying to hack your computer.
Yeah.
This is a lesson not to type arbitrary code that someone tells you to.
Okay, cool. Is anyone else still waiting? Or is everyone good? Oliver's still waiting.
Hey, Kasey, what are dependencies?
Oh, dependencies are basically like other libraries that React depends on to run. So I'll show you in a sec when I open up the default like starter template, but you'll see a huge list of everything that it needs to run. And it's something you can also add to if you want to use like third-party libraries. I'll go over that in a sec. But I think, okay, since we're still waiting a little bit, I'm just gonna go ahead and open it up, and I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the file structure. So even if you don't have your thing running yet, it should be fine. So I'm gonna go ahead. I like using Visual Studio Code, but you can use whatever IDE you want. I'm gonna go ahead and open up mine. I should be able to find it. What did I need it? Okay. So if you have yours downloaded already, you should see something like this. I'm just going to go over the structure really quickly. So if you look, there's a bunch of folders, and Jimmy asked about dependencies. So that's something we actually have to install in a sec once everyone's caught up. But if you look in the package.json file and then the packagelock.json file, you'll see a huge list of like different libraries and their versions. So these are basically all the dependencies that React has. And when you install your own packages using npm later, if you want to add third-party libraries and stuff, it'll be added here too automatically. So yeah, this is just a huge list of everything that it installs. But on that, Oliver, is your thing done installing, or are you still waiting on that? Okay, cool. So everyone just go ahead and open up their project. And then I'm going to just open the terminal in Visual Studio Code. But you can use your regular terminal too. And I'm going to have everyone just run some commands. So like I said, there are a ton of dependencies. So you're going to have to run npm install. So go ahead and do that. And I think I'm going to, for some reason, my node version keeps switching back. So I'm just going to have to switch really quick. Okay, and then if you run npm install, it's going to basically install all those packages listed. So go ahead and do that. I think, did that already? I do have it all installed already. Or, yeah. Let's see. And then after that, so if I want, I'll write in the chat too. npm, sorry, I'm trying to do it with no autocorrect. It keeps autocorrecting me. Here, npm install, just like that. If you look at the bottom of my terminal, sorry about that. My chat keeps trying to autocorrect npm to like never mind. Okay, so you should see that it installs a bunch of packages. Okay, and then after yours is finished installing, you should be able to run npm start. And that should open up your React app in another, oh yes, yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that. You should be in your directory. The same one basically as the packagelock.json, because that basically tells npm what it should install. And then if you run it, it should open in another tab. And if you want to go to it, it's localhost 3000. And you should see something like that. I don't think that's an issue, Oliver. I think it should be fine. So go ahead and try running it. If it doesn't work, let us know. But I think I got that same message, so you should be okay. But basically, it should look like this. So again, npm install and then npm start.
Mine, it's just a warning, but it says like there's a specific one that's just like, oh, none of this specific package is installed. You must install the pure dependency yourself.
I think if you can run the app, I think it should be fine. I get those
Okay.
sometimes, but it hasn't been like a big issue or like caused any errors.
Okay.
It didn't open up in a new tab for me, and it's not default localhost 3000 for me. Is there a way I can find
If it's
how or like what it is?
So if you look at your terminal, if it compiled successfully, it should tell you what it's running on. So if you look on the right side of my screen, it says localhost.
Oh, maybe it didn't compile successfully then.
Okay, try that again. You might have to npm install again if it didn't work for whatever reason.
Oh, another question is, what did you run in order for like the local host thing to open up?
npm start. Sorry, I keep trying to type in the chat, but it doesn't. Here, okay. There you go. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that should open up, and you should see something like this. This is just the default boilerplate that they provide.
Oh, JK, it's because I didn't run npm start. Okay, and then if anyone else has any issues, go ahead and just unmute or chat. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and just move on. Okay, so now that I have it running, I'm just gonna go over how this works kind of. So if you look, you can't really see any HTML files here. That's because the only HTML file we have is in the public folder. And then if you look at index.html, this is the single web page technically. You see React app, you see a couple things. Basically, there's this one div tag called with an ID root. So that's where everything gets rendered. So your entire React app just gets put inside here. And the way that happens is if you go to source and you go to index.js, you'll see we import React, React DOM, some CSS, and then you can see React DOM.render, and it renders whatever you pass in as the first argument into that specific element with that root ID. So basically in the index HTML, that div tag. So that's where everything gets put. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding stuff to this app component. So whenever you create a component, you want to import it into the file. And then you basically use it like this. It's like its own HTML tag that you define. So if I go to app.js, this is what it looks like. Technically, so this is a functional React component. Some of you might have used class-based React components before, but we'll be using functional components and hooks today. So if you look, app is a function, and basically all it does is return some HTML, or what it looks like HTML, but this is actually something else called JSX, and it gets compiled into HTML later. And the main difference is that you can basically use JavaScript in here. So if you look at this, logo is actually imported in the JavaScript, and then you use these curly braces to actually put that value into your HTML. So that's kind of like the basis of the React app. You don't have to worry about, a lot of this stuff is just extra logos and stuff just for their boilerplate, but we're going to ignore that for now. So if everyone can go to app.js, I want you guys to just go ahead and just delete everything in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything in this return statement right here, and I'm just going to make my own div. Okay, cool. And then if you want to test it, go ahead and just write whatever you want. I'm just going to write like hello or something. And then if I run it, or if you automatically refresh, it should refresh your page for you. And then you can't see it because it's on the side. But now all my app component consists of is that word hello. So you can basically put anything in here. Okay. So we're going to be creating two components today. So the first one's going to be the to-do list component. And then we're also going to make separate to-do components. So the to-do list is going to conditionally render a bunch of the other singular to-dos you saw on Eddie's demo. So I'm gonna go ahead and in the source folder, I'm gonna create another folder called components. So this is usually how React apps are structured. So I'm just gonna call that components. And then inside this folder, I'm gonna create, let's see, I'm gonna create 4 files. I'll just create them all right now. I'm gonna call this to-do list.js. So that's the where we're gonna put that functional component. I'll also create to-do list.css, and then also to-do.js and to-do.css. So go ahead and create those 4 files. Also, I just realized I shouldn't capitalize these. Sorry about that. That's just convention. It doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna go ahead and change that really quick. Okay. And then a quick thing, I know the point of this workshop isn't CSS. So if you want it to be styled like the way Eddie showed in the demo, I'm gonna just quickly send the link to the files on our GitHub. If you want to just copy the CSS file, that's totally fine. I'll be coding and putting in the class names that I associated with the styling. So in case you don't want to like deal with all of that, feel free to just copy the 2 CSS files code and just paste it into your own. But I'll give you guys a little time if you guys want to do that.
Or if you're feeling very creative, you can try to create your own CSS.
But yeah, wait like a minute and then I'll keep going. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the to-do list.js file. So go ahead and navigate to there. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import React. So just import React from React, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and import the CSS file right now too. So I'm going to just go import /to-do list.css. Okay, and so I told you guys before, we're going to be using functional components. So essentially, this whole file is just a function that returns JSX, and we just export that. And then in our app component, we'll import it and write it down. I'll just show you that in a second instead of explaining it. But we're going to just create a really simpler boilerplate for it. So I'm just going to do const to-do list equals to, I'm just going to use an arrow function here. And then basically all you need in this is a return statement. So I'm going to go ahead and return and then parentheses. And then here, I'm just going to make a div for now. I'm going to just give it an ID of to-do list so that my CSS actually matches up. Okay. And then I'm just going to write to-do list in here for now, just so we can check if it works. Okay, so go ahead and do that. And then the last thing you need to do is you need to export it. So I'm just going to export default to-do list. Okay, and then if I save that, okay, and then if I go back to my app.js, I'm going to go ahead and import that. So I'm going to import to-do list, the component from, and then I think, what is the path name here? dot slash dot dots, or no, it's slash components slash to-do list dot, actually you don't need the JS, that should work fine. And then like I showed you before, I can go ahead, I'm going to delete this hello, and then I can use that component just like I would an HTML tag. So it's just going to look like that. And then if I flip back to my React app, you should see now my to-do list renders, and it's just a single word, so nothing exciting. But this is what your page should look like right now. So if anyone has any questions about that, or if their thing isn't working, feel free to speak up right now. I'm going to go ahead and grab my CSS.
So should we be copying all of the files from GitHub, or do we only need to do list.js and CSS right now?
You just, if you want the styling, feel free to copy just the CSS files. You don't need to copy any of the other files here.
Do you mind going back to the to-do list.js?
Yeah, give me 1 second. To-do list.js. Okay, here's what it should look like. Oh yeah, and if you added the CSS, it should look like that on the left.
What did you import in app.js?
I imported the to-do list component. Let me just, can I split the screen like this? Sorry, my screen kind of small. Okay, yeah, so this is what it should look like. So on app.js, we import to-do list from /components to-do list, and then we basically just use it in there like an HTML tag.
How did you split the view in Visual Studio Code?
If you just drag the file and you like move it to the edge, it should show like that you can do it. And you can also split down low usually too.
There's also a button on the right side that looks like 2 rectangles. You can also click on that, and that should split the view too.
Dang, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that one right there.
Yeah.
You can also split more, like if you can move one in the middle and have 3 in a row if you like that.
Oh, nice.
If you got a big monitor.
Okay, any other questions, clarifications before I move on?
Can you just, so the syntax that you use on line 5, what exactly, like when it says like constant to-do list, it defines like to-do list as the component, and then like it equals parentheses, and then it like has the arrow. Is that like something, is like the parentheses supposed to do something, or is that like a placeholder for what it's supposed to return?
So, okay, the parentheses is basically the same thing as the function on the right. These are basically just 2 ways to write a function in JavaScript.
Oh, okay.
Later, potentially, these could be like arguments, like parameters and stuff like that.
Right.
That's all it's for. But these do the same thing. Like if you wanted to do function, to-do list, parentheses, you could also do it that way too.
Okay. Is that what you were talking about in terms of like the different ways that you can kind of like like you can kind of make these JavaScript files? I know you mentioned that we're going to be like using this type of like a function based approach. What is the other like possible type of approach that you could use technically?
There's also another type of component called class-based components. I think Eddie has more experience using those.
Yeah.
But or if Eddie, you want to talk a little bit about those kinds.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, you would be creating a class. So with that class would have its own methods and own things associated to it. And you would just return an object or you would return an instance of that class.
And then you could use like the what's it called, the attributes or like the tags in the same way?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you.
Though there are some things that are very different when it comes to the class components and functional components. I think the more popular use of React now is leaning more towards functional based components. Since the class based components, you had to kind of create a lot of stuff. You had to create like a lot of methods to check for different things for the components.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions out there? Okay, cool then. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the second component. We'll flesh out the other to-do list component in a second, but I'm gonna open it up so you guys can see both. Okay, so same thing for the to-do.js. So I'm gonna import React from React. I'm also gonna just import the CSS file, so ./to-do.css. Okay, and then I'm gonna again use a functional component. So const to do equals to, and then again, I'm just gonna, for now, make a return statement and just return a div that says to do. And then I'm just gonna give it a class name equals to do. And one difference between JSX and regular HTML is you have to use class name with a capital N. Although most of the time React knows what you mean, but like good practice is just using class name. And then last thing, I'm just going to export default to do. And if I save that, it's not going to do anything yet because I still have to import it. So that's actually used somewhere. But go ahead and type that part out.
Would you repeat the thing you said about class name? Sorry.
Oh yeah, so that's one difference between HTML and JSX, which this technically is JSX, not HTML. So there are a couple, what's it called? Is it attributes, I think, of HTML that you have to, that have slightly different names. So like instead of class, you have to do class name. I think there are a couple other things too. Like if you do inline styling, the name of the styling properties are a little different, but that's essentially just a small thing to remember.
I think on click also is another one that's different.
Yeah. It's basically just switching things to like camel case. So yeah.
So for the last line, export default to do and to-do list, can you create like multiple constants and then like have a thing that exports like default, and then you can like have other ways to export? Like I'm just trying to figure out like if the export default, can you add other things to this component or like this JS file and then like export in a different way?
I've never seen like component files export multiple things, but I know in JavaScript you can export multiple. Like if you had multiple functions, you could add the export thing to the very beginning, kind of like that. And then when you import it into another file, you have to specify which function you want, if that makes sense. But yeah. Okay, any other questions before I move on? Okay, cool. So we're gonna actually just stick this to-do component into the to-do list for now. Later on, we'll conditionally render it based on like what data we have. But I'm gonna go back to the to-do list.js file, and I'm gonna go ahead and import, import my component we just created. So the top, I'm just gonna do import to do from /to do. Okay. And then you can go ahead and just stick it in your div right here. So I'm just gonna do to do /packet. And then if you run your thing again, you should see, oh, sorry, it's kind of blocking the screen. You should see that there's one singular to do there. And let's say later we're gonna add multiple. So if I wanted to do, let's say 3 to-dos and save it, you can see that 3 of them will pop up. So potentially if I have, well, we will add more complicated HTML, like styling, whatnot. it's really easy to just duplicate the component onto the screen, which makes it a lot easier than just using plain vanilla JavaScript with HTML and such.
This is kind of like off topic, but like, is there a reason why you have a space between your second and third import on your to-do list.js file and not on your to-do.js file? Like,
oh,
is it just a
no,
stylistic
it
choice,
doesn't
or?
matter. It's just sometimes I add extra lines.
Okay.
Yeah, it
okay.
doesn't matter. You can organize the imports however you want. Okay, cool. Any other things?
Is there a reason why my to do my to do.css isn't being found? Let me that's probably just mine. I think I can figure it out, hopefully. I'll let you know if I can.
Okay, let me know if you still need help on it later. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So right now, all our to-dos don't really have anything to them. Eventually, we're going to pass in information to each to-do component so that each one shows obviously like a different to-do, like in Eddie's example. But to do that, I'm going to show you guys how to use something called props. So props are kind of like, I like thinking of them as like arguments to a function. So you can kind of think of each component tag as like a function call, sort of, where you can pass in information. So if I'm gonna code up some dummy data right now, just for an example, because we're not gonna have the backend set up today. I'm just gonna go ahead and create an array of data. You can just put in one for now. Oh wait, I kind of need a name for that. I'm gonna just call them dummy to-dos. And then in there, I'm going to just have a list of objects. So this is kind of like when you load data from the backend, it's usually going to come in an array and with objects with different like properties. So for now, I'm just going to give my stuff an ID. So maybe one, task, maybe clean room. And then we're also going to have a completed field. So those are 3 things that we want for each of our to-dos. And I'm just going to have this one be false. And then I'm going to go ahead and just copy that maybe like 2 times or 1 time, just so we have some kind of like data and see it. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. Walk dog, probably the most generic to do ever. Okay, so go ahead and just code up some data for yourself, because we're going to use those in just a second. And the ID, just a side note, but the IDs are pretty important because whenever you load information from a database, each entry is going to have a specific ID. And that's used a lot later throughout your components whenever you want to fetch extra information about that specific piece of data. But to move on, so it's fine if you only have one to do as well. You can always add to that later. But I'm going to kind of explain how props work. So like I said, they're kind of like arguments to a function. So like I think Pari said earlier, she was asking about what these parentheses mean. So that's actually where we pass or we put parameters you can think of. So I'm going to go to my to-do.js really quick, and I am going to add in some things up here. So I'm going to go ahead and add curly braces. And then I am going to I want to pass in 3 things for each to do. One's going to be the ID, one's going to be the task, and then one's going to be that value if it's completed or not, so a Boolean. So those are 3 pieces of data that we can use to render our to-do, like with whatever that piece of data tells us, essentially. So let's say I want to, let's see, where should I go from here? Okay, so for now, I'm just gonna go ahead and use the task. So in order to use that prop, it's basically just a variable that you can just use in your JSX. So let's say I wanna do to do, but instead of that, I'm gonna make a p tag, okay? And I'm just gonna give it an ID of class name just so that my styling, or not class name, task name, so that my styling goes into effect. And then the way to insert variables into your JSX is just using curly braces. So all I have to do is curly brace, and then I want to do task, and then ending curly brace. And I can go ahead and save it. It's not going to do anything right now just because we didn't pass in the actual prop yet. So we'll do that in a second. But if anyone has any questions about that portion, feel free to ask. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my to-do list.js. And for now, I'm just gonna hard code some stuff into our to-do component. So if you look, I have a couple to-dos here. And the way to pass in props is kind of like HTML attributes. So I know that to-do has an ID prop, a task prop, and a completed prop. So the way to do it, I can do ID equals to, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and do 1 for now. And if you put in regular like numbers or strings, you're gonna have to put it within curly braces as well. Let's see, I'm just gonna hard code task equals to, I don't know, clean. Oh, actually, I guess strings you don't have to. I'll have to double check that. And then completed equals to, I'm gonna do false.
Yeah, I think strings might be fine.
Okay, cool. And then if I go ahead and save it now, you should see that clean, my task name essentially pops up on your browser or your React app. So that's essentially how you can pass information through. So I guess some terminology. So technically our to-do list is a parent component. And then our to-do is going to be our child component. And the only way that the children know information from their parent is if it's passed as a prop. So that's a pretty important thing. And I think later we'll go over a way to pass information back up to the parent, but it's a little more complicated. Does anyone have any questions about that or have any issues with their code?
This isn't a question, but can we have like a quick bathroom break?
Okay, go for it now.
Sorry. I'll be right back.
Yeah, if anyone else needs to go to the restroom, feel free,
Yeah.
I guess.
All right, I'm back.
Cool. Okay, let me actually see. Oh no, that didn't really work. Oh well, it's okay. Okay, cool. So that's how you pass props in.
I think we're missing Tristan. Oh, he's back.
Oh, did Tristan go too? Okay, cool. Do we have everyone? Okay, cool. Okay. So let's see, where should I go here next? Okay, so now we have a way to pass in information to our to-dos. So that's great. But actually, let's see. Okay, yeah. So, but then how do we like conditionally render like we don't know how many to-dos we're gonna have necessarily, because when you grab data from the database, like you don't know how much is in there and you don't want to have to depend on hard coding a certain number of to-dos. So in order to do that, we're going to create another function that basically returns a list of to-do components based on whatever information is passed in. So I'm going to go ahead and add a function under my dummy to-dos variable, and I'm just going to call it const render to-dos. And I'm going to make this into a JavaScript arrow function as well. Okay. And essentially what it's going to do is it's going to map through my list, and it's just going to return that to-do component with the specified values passed in as props. So if I'm going to go ahead and return, and then I'm going to use my dummy to-dos dot map. Okay, and then I'm going to pass in, let's see, this function is going to be to-do. Okay, so it's going to go through everything in my list, and each one is going to be passed into this specific to-do parameter or argument parameter here. And then essentially what I'm going to do in here is, or if you aren't aware of it yet, but JavaScript's mapping, or when you map an array, it basically returns a new array with new data based on whatever you return here. So if I want to return a to-do component with ID equal to, and then I'm going to check this first to-do. So in my case with the dummy to-dos, it's going to be this first object. So clean room, ID 1, completed false. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. So to-do dot ID in here with the curly braces. I also need to specify the task. So my task is going to be equal to to-do dot task. And then the last thing we're going to pass in is completed. So completed equals to-do dot completed. So, and then don't forget that closing brace. Then, yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and X that out really quick. Oh my gosh, I can't do this with the Zoom screen. Sorry, give me a sec. Okay. Okay, but anyways, this is what it should look like right now. So we have our render to-dos function, and then for each to-do in this list, I'm going to return an object, or not an object, a component.
There's a typo on line 23. You did like to-do dot completed.
Oh, completed. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay. Cool. Okay. And then the last thing we want to do with that is we need to actually call this function, because right now your thing is not going to look any different. So I'm going to go down to my return statement, and I'm just going to delete this stuff that we have. So delete all those to-do components. And instead, I'm going to use these curly braces, and I'm going to call that function we just created. So render to-dos. And then don't forget the parentheses at the end, because we want to actually call it so that it returns those. So if you go ahead and run it now, and then, yeah, refresh your React, you should see that 2 or however many that you wrote are going to be there on the screen. But yeah, let me know if anyone's having trouble with that, or if you have any extra questions.
Why do we have to put the calling render to-dos in curly braces?
It's because this is technically like JSX. So if I just wrote it like this, it would just be text. So if I refresh, you see it's just render to do. So if we want it to actually be treated as JavaScript, we need to add the curly braces.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, concerns, confusion? Oh wait, yours says to do twice. Okay, I think you might have missed one step. So if you go to todo.js, I changed that part. So instead of just returning a div that says to do, I created a p tag right here. And I used the task prop that we passed in and put it there instead. I think that's the step that you missed. Okay, cool. That worked. Nice. Anyone else having problems with their code? Okay, cool. Let me take a look. Okay, cool. So if everyone's kind of got that working, I'm going to go back to todo.js really quick, and we're going to just use the other two props we passed in. Or actually, we're not going to use ID yet, but Eddie will add that in later when we do the backend stuff. But first off, let's just create the input box. So above that p tag, I'm just going to go ahead and add input. If you want the styling that I have, so I would do ID equal to checkbox. Type of input, I'm going to make it checkbox. And then the value, so checked. So if the checkbox is completed or not, I'm going to set that equal to whatever we have passed in. So our completed prop. And then let's see, last thing. I'll add that part in later, but go ahead and just close that input. So if you go ahead and refresh now, you should be able to see two input boxes for each to do, and they're not going to do anything yet because they're always going to be equal to that completed value. And then the other thing I'm going to go ahead and do right now is create that delete button that Eddie showed you all. So I'm just going to go button ID equals delete btn. And then I'm going to go ahead and just write delete in here. So if you run that, you should have your little to-do list.
I just had a quick question about the syntax. In the input statement, is there usually a slash at the end of the tag? Because I noticed with like when we're making when we're calling the functions, we add like we name the tab and then we have like the slash and then the caret or like and so I was wondering, is that something that is sometimes this just sometimes shows up when it's the self-closing tag, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the slash caret thing is for self-closing tags
Okay,
only.
okay.
So Sublime text highlights the whole thing all weird. Okay, cool. If no one else has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So I'm going to introduce something pretty important in React, or like very important actually, is state. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to todolist.js, and I'm going to go back up to the top. And the first thing we have to do is you have to import use state, which is a React hook. So I'm going to go to the top, line 1, add a comma. I'm going to use these curly braces, and then I'm going to type use state inside. Okay, And so now I can use that React hook in my component. So state's basically used to keep track of like values of certain things that your React component needs to render accordingly. So we're going to change it so that our to-dos is technically a piece of state, so that whenever it changes, the whole entire React component will re-render and update based on that. So like if we add a to-do and we update that state, our render to-dos function would get called again, and it would display that new to-do alongside all the other ones. So in order to do that, we're going to go to the very top of our React component, and then I'm going to go ahead and add const, and then in brackets, usually how you do it is you specify first the name of the state. So if I do to-dos, and then the second part is a function that you can use to set that piece of state. So usually you call it set and then whatever your state's name is. But technically these things can be named whatever you want. This is just like the normal convention. So if I do set to-dos, okay, and then I would set this equal to that use state hook, so state, and then in parentheses, whatever you want the default value to be. So let's say like a list, you probably want the default to be an empty list. If it's a string, you'd set the default value to just an empty string, or you could set it to another, whatever you want, honestly. Okay, so that's the piece of state that we're gonna set up first. And then let's see. Okay, we're gonna change it. It's gonna be a little, the to-do list isn't gonna work exactly how it's supposed to yet, just because we need the back end. But we're just gonna set it up front end wise as best we can. So once you've got that piece of state, I'm also gonna import another hook called use effect. So if you go back up to the top, I'm going to import use effect just like we did for use state.
Would you talk about React hooks for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Just like what they are.
Okay, if you ask me for like a very in-depth definition, you're probably better off looking it up online. But essentially I believe they're kind of like functions, and they return certain things. Like you can actually make your own custom hooks. I don't have that much experience with them. So I can't really give a good answer for this, but these are like the main hooks that React provides. So sorry about that. I can't give a good answer for that.
I think the like best short way to explain it is that hooks deal with state for functional components.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. So use effect, if you've ever used class-based components in React, it's basically the lifecycle method. So like you use it to specify when the component should re-render, or maybe it should change certain things, or like maybe when it first gets rendered to the screen, or maybe when a certain piece of state changes, then it should do certain things. That's basically what use effect does. So I'm gonna go ahead and use it right here. So use effect. Okay, and then this itself is a function, just like all hooks. And what we're going to pass into this function one is another function that will get called. And then the second argument is to specify when I want this function to get called. Sorry, that sounded kind of repetitive, but it's basically like if I want a function to be called on like a re-render, or maybe when my to-dos update, this is where I would set that up. So I'm going to go ahead and use an arrow function, and that will be my first argument. And then the second argument I'm going to pass in is, just for the sake right now, an empty array, and I'll explain how that works in a second. Okay, so basically, this function right here, let's see, I can do a quick demo, but I'll just console.log hi right here. Let's see. And basically, this arrow function will get called whenever my function renders for the first time. So that's what empty brackets mean. Let's say I wanted something else to happen, but I want to console.log hi whenever we add a to-do or the to-dos change. Then I would put my piece of state in here like this, so that whenever to-dos is changed, it's going to also call this function. But for like a quick demo, just so that you guys understand this a little better, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then I'm going to open up my console in the browser. Okay, you can you can ignore these warnings for now, but you can see if I refresh the page, you'll see hi appears right here, because that's because my component is rendering onto the screen. So it's going to run whatever is in that function. So what we want to do here is we want to set up our to-do state right when the function renders. So later that when we add a call to the backend to actually grab data from a database, it'll load all the to-dos into our state for the React component. So I'm going to go ahead and just move our dummy data for now into this use effect function. Or yeah, I think that's how I did it. Yeah, I'm just going to move into there. Oh, you're going to have to import it at the top, Oliver. So if you look next to use state, comma, use effect, and then that should work.
I just had a quick question about when you say like constant to-dos and then set to-dos equals the use state, and then you mentioned like, oh, we could put to-dos in the brackets in like the second argument for use effect. What is that to like, what does that hold again? Like, what is like the to-dos a certain, like what exactly would that look like? What does that variable hold?
In this case, we're going to make to-dos the list of to-do objects. So I'm literally just going to set dummy to-dos to that piece of state. So it's kind of redundant in this sense, but once we grab data from the back end, it'll make more sense why we're doing this. But essentially, like you were saying, we're going to set to-dos to whatever data we want. So I'm just going to use set to-dos. So basically whatever this second argument of use state is. And then I'm going to use parentheses, and I'm going to just set this to dummy to-dos for now. So basically when the component is loaded for the first time, it's just going to set the to-do state to this array right here. So if you reload, oh, did I spell it wrong? Dummy to-dos. Oh, okay, I know why. Sorry, one more thing we have to change because we used it in render to-dos and now we moved it into use effect. But instead of using dummy to-dos down here in this render to-dos function, I'm going to use my state. So I'm just going to change this to to-dos, and then I'm going to go ahead and save that. And oh, what happened here? Dummy to-dos. Hello, I think I saved it. Refresh. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, and if you refresh, you should see the same thing we had before, except this time we're using the state instead. And then, yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
So just to clarify, when we talk about to-dos, that's like the state of like how many to-dos and things like that we have currently on the web page, or however much it must be. And when you use effect, the very first argument is is that the default to-dos, or is that just like the information that we want to use?
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Like the first argument for use effect actually is a function. So later we won't do this. We'll be asking the backend for the information and then setting it.
Yeah. And you said the second one, like the right now it says empty parentheses. What did you say that second parameter does again?
Yeah, so that basically specifies when you want this function to be called, or when you want this effect, I guess, to take place. So an empty parentheses means just on the first time the component's rendered. But let's say, yeah.
If it was a function and then like every time this specific thing happened, you'd want to call the function again.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, everyone else good on that? Any other questions? Okay, cool. Let's see. Okay, I think, let's see, next thing we can do is I'm gonna go ahead and set up a way to add a new task. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and add a little form at the bottom. But first off, let's see, values. Okay, I'm gonna set up another piece of state. So a lot of times the pattern when using forms in React is you basically keep track of the inputs of the form inside state. And then whenever the submit is hit, it uses the state from the React component to send that data wherever. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the top and I'm gonna add another piece of state. So I'm gonna do const, I'm just gonna call this new task and then set new task. And I'm going to set this equal to use state and then an empty string in this case, because it's just going to be a text input. So go ahead and do that. Okay.
I have another quick question. On line 25, when we set to-dos, we never actually define set to-dos, right? The function itself. Is that something that like use state and use effect do for us?
Yeah, so that's what use state does. I believe it basically just returns a function for you to alter that specific piece of state. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about defining it anywhere.
Thank you.
Okay, so going back to the bottom, let's go ahead and create that little form. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do, let's see, really quickly, I'm just gonna add a div for the styling sake. So div, so this will be for the list of to-do. So ID equals to list. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put that render to-dos inside of that. Okay. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add another div underneath. So ID equals, I'm going to add task section. Okay. And this is where we're going to create our form. So same thing in HTML. So form tag. I'm not going to add an on submit field yet because we don't have that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and create the input. So ID equals to new task. Type equals to text. Let's see. I'm gonna set its value equal to that state we have up there. So I'm just gonna use new task, will be the value. And then the last thing we're gonna do is the on change. So this is another thing. It's like on click, you have to do on change with camel case. And I'm going to set this equal to essentially a function that calls set new task that we have from the state above. So I'm going to use JSX, or not JSX, but the curly braces for this. And then I'm just going to define an arrow function. So E would be the event. And then I am going to set new task. And then I'm going to pass in e.target.value. So whatever the user is currently typing in is going to be set to the new task. Okay, and then I think, don't forget that closing part of the tag. Okay, let me just peek at what it looks like. Okay, cool. Okay, and then after that, we just need a submit button. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button tag, type equals to submit, ID equals to add BTN if you want the styling. I'm just going to do add task. Go, and then if I save, you should see that on the left. Yeah, any questions right now?
Can you go over the on change portion again?
Yeah, so on change is basically I'm just passing in a function. So I'm just writing an arrow function. Instead, you could technically define a function outside here and then also pass that in. But this is simpler if you only have like one line of code that you want to run in it anyways. But it basically takes the input, the event from changing whatever typing, and then it sets the new task state that we have up here. So it sets new task equal to the target value.
Is that the updated state?
It updates the state essentially, yes.
And is that like that target value? Is that like a regular thing is that how we would like update the states in general? Is that the function or like the to use?
No, that's actually just like from regular JavaScript HTML. So whenever I think it's like a on change event, that's basically how you access what's in the input box. So that's not specific to React. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And then this event, this E input, is that like an on-change specific thing, or can attributes access this event more generally?
I think it itself is an on-change event, but like on click, you can also access this event that's similar. Let me actually, I'm gonna go ahead and just console.log E really quick, and then I'll open it up in the browser. Let's see. So if I inspect, let's see, console, and if I type, yeah, or it's like something called a synthetic base event. So if you look at it on change, and then you can kind of see all the fields it has. So target dot, I think values way down there, but that's usually how you can access input field values and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I usually have to like check and play around a little bit to actually get the right value, but yeah, that's essentially how you deal with inputs. Okay, I'm going to change this back really quick. Okay, let me double check if I'm doing everything right. Oh, and then the last thing I'm just going to add is a required at the end, just so that they can't submit an empty field. So that's just regular HTML right there. Okay, so if you try and hit add to do, I think it should tell you you have to fill out the field. Okay, and then the next thing, if there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and define a function to actually add the to do. And right now this is purely front end. So normally you would probably in this function make a call to the back end to actually add it to the database, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So I'm going to go ahead right under render to dos. I'm going to create another function just called add to do. So const add to do equals to, and this is where that event value is going to come in again. Again, that's just like with submitting forms. And then I'm going to go ahead and that out. And in here later, again, we're going to replace it with a request to the back end. But for now, we're just going to update our state. So I'm first going to do e.prevent default. This basically stops the page from refreshing. Usually people do this. I mean, if you want a hard refresh, you can take that out. And then I am going to use my useState hook, the set to dos part to actually update it. So I'm going to go ahead and do set to dos. And then the thing about state is that you can't, one thing you should not do, like you always want to use this setter method that comes with it when you declare it using the hook. React will not, or actually it might let you, but it's really bad practice to do something like to dos equals to like e.target.value. Like that would be very bad. Like you never want to actually manually change the state yourself. So you always want to use this setter function. And I am going to I am going to set my to-dos to the current state plus the new task that we have in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do to-dos dot concat. So I'm adding to that array. And then I am going to concatenate my own little array with that one task in it. Because again, we don't want to alter the actual state. So I don't want to use push here, which you normally use to add to an array. I want to return a whole new array to set it to. So I'm going to do to-dos dot concat. And this looks kind of confusing. I'm going to go ahead and change the indentation a little bit. So yeah, we're concatenating an array with, actually, how can I make this less confusing? Give me a second. Okay, so it's kind of like an array with one singular to-do object. So basically, I'm going to set task is going to be our new task state that's currently there. Completed, we're just going to make it false. And then I would add an ID, but it's kind of hard to make unique IDs right now. Honestly, I'll just hard code something. But normally this is going to be different for each piece of information. Okay, so this is going to update my to-do state. And then the last thing I want to do in this method is I want to set new tasks to an empty string again. So set new task, empty string. Okay, if I go ahead and save that, we're not using it yet, so there's nothing that's going to happen. Does anyone have any questions or confusion about this part? Cool. And then to actually see this kind of working, we have to make sure this function gets called somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll back down to our JSX. And inside the form tag, I'm going to go ahead and say on submit equals to add to do. And important thing, if you look on line 54, I actually called render to-dos with the parentheses at the end. But in this case, with the on submit, we do not want to do that. Because we're just passing in the function to be called later. We don't want to actually call the function right away. So that's why those two are different. But I believe if you go ahead and try your code, it should work. Let me say hi, add task. Yeah, and you should see it pop up. Let me know if anyone's having trouble with that. But essentially the state should get up. Unterminated JSX contents. I haven't heard that one. Did you make sure you have all your closing tags and closing curly braces? Here, I'll make this bigger so you can take a look. I'll also look it up on the side. Let's see. Unterminated. Let's see.
That was it. I was missing one closing tag.
Okay, cool. Okay.
I just had a quick question. Is there anything that you did before you did the on submit equals add to do? You said the new task to the quotation marks. I'm just like, when I'm submitting, it's just not adding it to it, but it doesn't give me an error. So I'm guessing I missed a function call somewhere.
Okay, that would mean that your to-dos aren't updating or that piece of state isn't. So it's probably around like lines 37 to 45, somewhere in there. That's my guess. So yeah, make sure you're passing in todos.concat, and then it should be like concatenating like a new array with just that new task information in it. Okay, and if anyone has any other questions or issues that their code's not working or something like that, just let me know. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on. So one last thing for the to-do list component that we're gonna do is we're gonna do that little toggle checkbox. I think Eddie showed like you can toggle between showing completed to-dos versus showing non-completed to-dos. So I'm gonna show you how you can add something like that to like conditionally render pieces of your React component. So again, let's go back up to the top. I'm going to add another piece of state called show completed. So const show completed, and then set show completed equal to use state. And then I'm going to set this equal to false initially. So using state like this is super useful. I use it to do pop-ups too. We can maybe explore that later on in the workshop series, but it's basically the way that you toggle things in React. So go ahead and set that up. Okay. And then also one thing, since we have some hard-coded data right now, go ahead and in your like dummy to-dos list, change one of them to completed equals to true. So I'm gonna say, yes, I did walk my dog, and I'm gonna set that equal to true. Just so that we can see the difference later. Okay, so once you've got those two things, we're gonna make some edits to that render to-dos function, because right now it just renders everything in the to-dos. But like say if show completed is false, we don't want to show the ones that are completed already. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna basically just set up an if statement inside our render to-dos function. So inside that map call, before that second return statement, I'm going to set up an if show completed. Okay, then we are going to, let's see, how did I do this? Okay, if show completed, we just render everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this and paste it in here. Okay, so let's see. Yeah. So if show completed, render everything. And then we're also going to add an else statement. So let's say we only want to show completed tasks. So this is when I really like using ternary operators if you all have used them before, but it's pretty useful in React. I'm going to return. So I'm going to check is to do completed. So this specific to do, is it completed? Question mark. If it is completed and basically show completed is false, I'm just going to return null. And when you return null and render that in JSX, it just basically shows up as nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then to complete that ternary operator, I'm going to use a colon. And then if the to-do is not completed, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this component up here, and I'm going to render that. So if you run it now, let me see. Yeah, so if you rerun it, your completed to do that you set should not appear on the list right now because that piece of state, show completed, is false. Or yeah, false right now. Let me know if anyone has any questions about that portion.
Sorry, I was just wondering, you said there were two things that you did when you added the show completed and set new show completed. What were the two things?
Okay, the first thing is just setting up those two pieces of state.
Mhm.
And then the second thing is I changed one of my to-dos in my like hard-coded list to completed as false.
I see.
Or completed as true, sorry. So
thank you so much.
Just to we can see the difference. Okay, any other questions? Okay, cool. If not, we're going to go ahead and add the actual input box so that we can toggle between these two things. So if I go to the bottom of my component again, to the JSX, I'm going to go ahead and add another div above my list. So I'm going to go ahead and this adds here. So div ID equals subheader here. And then inside, I'm going to just put the number of, I'll just do the number of tasks. I think, Eddie, that's how your demo was. And then also a checkbox to toggle between showing completed and not showing completed. So the first thing I'll do really quickly is just the P tag to list out how many tasks we have left. So number of tasks. And then we're going to use those curly braces again if we want to display like the value of a variable. So I'm going to do to-dos, which is our state.length in here. Okay, so if I refresh really quick, you should see the number of tasks appear on your list. Okay. And the second thing we're gonna do is we're gonna set a label and an input box. So I'm gonna start with the label. So I'm gonna go ahead and do label, set this ID to show completed label. And then inside of there, I'm just gonna type out show completed tasks. Okay, if I refresh that, that should appear. And then we're going to add that input box. So input type equal to checkbox again. And then we're going to use that on change attribute equals to, and then in curly braces, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing we did for the input box on my line 70. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the event that happens with the on change, use an arrow function, and I'm going to set show completed, so that piece of state, and to e.target.checked. Okay, so that's just whether the checkbox is checked off or not. And then if you click on it now, you should see that you can toggle between showing those completed tasks and not showing them. And yeah, let me know if anyone has any questions, like clarifications, anything. Also, for styling purposes, if you care, you can go ahead and make the to-do list thing at the top, the title, into an actual H1. So I'm just going to do that really quick. ID equals to list, title, and then my to-do list in here. And then I also just added HR tags in between the list and the add section. So feel free to add that if you'd like. Okay. And then we're going to do one really last thing in the to-do component. Just kind of set it up for using the back end later. So I'm going to go back to that component if I can find it. I think it's over here. Okay, so in to-do.js, I'm just going to add a couple things. So we're going to want to be able to click on that delete button, and we're also going to want to be able to like complete the task or like uncomplete the task, if that's what you call it. So we're just going to write some methods for it so that we can add in the back end later. So I'm going to go ahead and write the first one. So I'm going to call this on checked equals to, we're going to use that E value for the event. And then I'm just going to write out some alerts for now, because it's kind of a pain to go and change the parent state from here when we're just going to use the back end in the end, eventually. So we'll just set this up for now. So I'm going to check if e.target.checked is equal to true. We're going to go ahead and we can just alert you completed the task. Else we'll just alert you made or you unchecked this task, something like that. It doesn't really matter what you put. And then again, we were going to add that on change thing to our input tag. So on change equals to, and then curly braces, E for that event. And then we'll call that on checked function we just had, and then we'll just pass in the event there. Okay, so go ahead and try that out. Let's see. It's not actually going to change the completed field of the task just because we aren't editing the actual state, but we'll do that with the backend later. But you can see it does trigger. Okay.
Can you show the div for the title again really quick?
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, the div is just, you know.
What did we just add in at the moment?
I added the on change handler in the input tag to use that on checked function that we just created. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to do just to set up for next time, we're going to create an delete task function. So const delete task equals to another arrow function. And in here, we're just going to alert deleted task. And then Eddie will add in the backend call eventually. But for now, we're just gonna pass this in as an on-click value for the button. So go ahead and go to your button tag, on-click, in camel case, like Eddie mentioned before, and then equals to delete task. And again, we don't want to use parentheses there because we're passing in the function to be called at a later time. So we don't want to call it right away. But if you have that, if you click the delete button, you'll get an alert. It's not going to actually delete yet, but we will add that in later. But yeah, any other questions about this or just about anything we went over? Because I think I'm pretty much done with like the basic front end and just the basics of React.
You just now just mentioned like why some of them we needed an E and this one doesn't. Can you quickly restate that again?
I talked a little bit about like passing in the function with a parentheses versus like not. In terms of like the event stuff, that's a good question. Like I think mostly for the on change ones, we have to grab that event value. For on click, it's not as, or I don't think we use it usually, but that's a good question. I'd have to look up more about like the differences between those two. But I think usually with like inputs, you have that event argument you need because you need data from it.
And then for like submits, you'd probably want to get events to prevent the default of refreshing.
That's true. Yeah, if anyone needs me to go back to a different file or wants any clarifications on anything that I talked about, just let me know. Otherwise, I think I'm pretty much done. So
Thank you so much, Kasey. You definitely deserve your self-care night in an hour.
I forgot that's up there. Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Oh.
What are you gonna do for your self-care, Kasey?
I don't know. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if I was gonna go to it just because it's like a virtual event. And I feel like virtual things are just kind of like, I don't know, self-care virtual is kind of weird, but we'll see. Maybe I'll do a face mask. Maybe I'll just, honestly, it's at dinner time, so I'll probably just be eating, but like, we'll see. But yeah, I think I'm pretty much done, unless there are any other questions. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening to me talk for like an hour and a half. So
see you all next week on Saturday. Same time.
Yeah, and I'll probably post on the Discord channel what we'd probably need to install to get our backend set up as well. So I'll post that in the Discord. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Kasey. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Kasey and Eddie.
thank you. Hi everyone. Thanks for
Thanks,
coming.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anything to talk about?
I don't know. I mean, you guys think it went okay? I don't know.
I think that
if
went
was,
great.
like-
Yeah, that was very
great.
informative. That was fantastic.
Yeah, you did a great job, Kasey.
I was like kind of nervous. I was like, and no one's talking. It feels weird. Like, it's like
Yeah, I can feel that, but it's because they got it, I think.
okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it was all very intuitive. Thank you.
Yeah, you were very, very clear with everything. It was great. Yeah, I think for next time, it's probably going to be pretty much the same. Though I'm probably going to go through it. That one's probably going to take the whole 2 hours, probably, is my guess. So we'll probably jump right into that. But yeah, if anything comes up, I'll let you know if we need anything. And yeah.
Okay.
Gotta work
For
today.
next week, did you want us do you want me to do anything, or are you just gonna do the whole workshop? Like,
Yeah, that goes for me too. If that's like, yeah.
Honestly, I think it might be better if I go through it because I'm the most familiar with it. So I know like exactly why I did certain things. So if anyone has a question, I can be immediately be like, that's why I did the thing I did, and kind of like
okay.
go through it. So, but if I feel like it might be too much, then I might ask. But I think for now it should be fine.
Okay. And then for your demo, are you just gonna build off my like basic front end branch on the GitHub, or
Yeah. So the way that I have it is I have it on a like separate thing in the same GitHub repository. So I'll probably just build off of that. Yeah.
okay, cool. Because I pretty much I think followed everything that's on that basic front end branch, so they should have all of that code as their base. So okay, cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. Some
Okay.
work today, and see you guys later then, I guess.
See you guys
See
next
ya.
week. Bye.